My name is Madeline Brooks, and this morning, as I sat behind the wide glass desk in my corner office, sunlight spilling across polished mahogany floors, I caught myself smiling at something I swore I'd never smile about. My tools, the very ones people once mocked me for carrying, now sat framed behind glass on the wall. A set of worn-out wrenches, their steel darkened with age, resting like trophies in a museum display. The city buzzed far below me, cranes lifting steel beams, car horns echoing off skyscrapers, the hum of commerce in motion. And here I was on the 32nd floor, with my silk blouse pressed sharp, my nails freshly painted in a shade called Iron Rose, sipping coffee that cost more than the entire lunch I once skipped just to buy a second-hand screwdriver. That's when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen froze me. Ethan Miller. My cousin. The same boy who used to laugh when I showed up at family gatherings with a heavy tool belt slung over my shoulder. "What are you going to do with that, Maddie?" "Build dollhouses," he'd sneer. Now, after years of silence, he was calling. I let the phone buzz in my hand, feeling a strange swirl inside me. Pride, hurt, a flash of triumph, but also something softer I didn't want to admit. Because if Ethan was reaching out, it meant one thing. He finally needed me. I wasn't always the woman with a skyline view and a name etched on a brass office plate. Back then, I was just Maddie, the girl who smelled like motor oil and carried a toolbox that seemed too heavy for her small hands. My family never understood why I loved machines. While other girls my age were braiding hair or talking about prom dresses, I was in our dusty garage, bent over an old lawnmower engine, sweat dripping down my forehead, my ponytail falling loose. My father would shake his head, muttering, "You'll ruin your hands, Madeline. No man wants a wife with grease under her nails." My mother stayed silent, but her silence stung even more. And my cousin Ethan? He was the loudest of them all. He'd gather his friends around, point at me fumbling with my rusted wrench, and laugh until his voice cracked. "Look at her, playing mechanic. Next she'll be fixing airplanes." The laughter would echo, sharp as nails against glass, lodging itself in my chest. I remember one particular day, clearer than most. I was 16, crouched on the cold concrete floor, trying to fix an old power drill I had found at a yard sale. My hands shook with frustration, tears threatening to blur my vision. Ethan kicked the toolbox across the floor, spilling sockets everywhere. "Face it, Maddie," he said, smirking. "You'll never make anything of this junk. Girls don't build. They marry." I wanted to scream, but instead, I bit down on the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. It was my grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, who found me later that night, sitting in the garage surrounded by scattered tools. She didn't scold me, didn't tell me to clean up. Instead, she handed me a small, velvet pouch. Inside was a silver-plated wrench, engraved with the words, "Strength is quiet." I clutched it so tightly that my knuckles ached. "If they laugh," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my face, "let them. One day, they'll choke on their laughter." That night, I made myself a promise. I would never ask for approval, never wait for applause. I would build something so undeniable that even the loudest of voices would fall silent. And so, the girl they mocked with tools became the young woman who packed her bags, left home, and started carving her own future, one bolt, one screw, one risk at a time. The first years away from home were brutal. I rented a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat in Detroit, the kind where the pipes clanged louder than the neighbors and the radiator hissed like it hated me. My kitchen was a hot plate and a single frying pan. At night, I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by manuals, second-hand tools, and scraps of machinery I salvaged from junkyards. I worked days as a cashier at a hardware store. Customers, mostly men, would smirk when I gave advice about drills or compressors. "Sweetheart, why don't you stick to paint swatches?" one of them chuckled once. I smiled politely, but inside I burned. Because after my shift ended, I stayed behind in the empty aisles, memorizing specs, running my fingers over the cold steel handles of tools I couldn't yet afford. At night, I studied. Engineering basics, small-scale mechanics, even business management courses from free online modules. My fingertips blistered from practice, my eyes burned from sleepless nights, but every cut and bruise felt like a step forward. The first real break came when Mrs. Caldwell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, walked into the hardware store one Saturday. She owned a small manufacturing workshop and needed repairs on her cutting machines. No one else wanted the job. It was tedious, greasy, and required patience. I offered. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my grease-stained nails, then nodded slowly.
Fine.
Show me what you've got. I worked the whole night in her workshop, tightening belts, replacing gears, and coaxing stubborn machines back to life. By dawn, the place hummed like new. When Mrs. Caldwell arrived, she didn't say much, just handed me an envelope with more cash than I'd ever held at once and said, "You're hired. Don't make me regret it." She became my first real mentor. Not the coddling type. If I showed up late, she'd lock the door. If my work was sloppy, she'd tear it apart. But she respected me, and that respect gave me something I had never been granted before: belief. Under her guidance, I built connections with suppliers, learned how to bid on contracts, and eventually saved enough to buy my first industrial machine outright. One machine turned into three. Three grew into a rented warehouse. I hired 2 employees, then 5. Within 5 years, I had my own small factory. I didn't tell my family. When they asked, I kept it vague. "I'm doing fine," I'd say, posting pictures of modest coffee shops instead of my humming factory floor. I didn't want their doubt. I didn't need their permission. The day I signed the papers for my second factory location, I slipped my grandmother's engraved wrench out of my bag. I held it against my palm, running my thumb over the words, "Strength is quiet." She was right. My strength wasn't in proving them wrong by shouting. It was in building something so undeniable, their laughter could no longer touch me. And piece by piece, contract by contract, the girl with mocked tools became a woman who owned not one, but an entire chain of factories. It was a Tuesday morning when the past finally walked into my present. I had just finished a board meeting, my team filing out with their laptops tucked under their arms, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and cologne. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked. "Madeline," she said cautiously, "you have visitors. They don't have an appointment, but they say they're family."
Family.
The word struck harder than I wanted to admit. When the glass doors opened, in walked Ethan Miller, older now, his once arrogant grin replaced by a tight, nervous smile. Behind him came my parents. My father's hair was grayer, my mother's hands fidgeted with the strap of her handbag. They looked around, wide-eyed, taking in the sleek office, the modern art on the walls, the panoramic view of the city, the hum of authority in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Wow, Maddie, this place it's..." He gestured vaguely at the high ceilings and glass partitions. "Impressive." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs slowly, deliberately. "This is my office. One of them, at least." My father's brows furrowed. "Your office? I thought you said you were working at a shop." I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. I was. Once. But things changed. Ethan's gaze landed on the framed display behind me. The old, rusted wrenches, the very tools he used to kick across the garage floor.
His jaw tightened.
"You kept those?" "Oh yes," I said softly. "They remind me." Silence again. Thick, uncomfortable. My mother's eyes darted to the polished floors, the awards lining the shelf, the photos of factory workers smiling in uniform. "Maddie," she whispered, "what is all this?" I rose from my chair, the click of my heels echoing against the glass walls. I walked slowly toward the window, then turned back to face them. My heart was steady now, stronger than the trembling girl I used to be. "This," I said, sweeping a hand across the office, "is the result of every late night you told me was a waste. Every bruise, every insult, every laugh you all had at my expense." My eyes locked on Ethan. "You mocked my tools. But those tools built the foundation of everything you see here." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. My father swallowed hard. My mother's eyes brimmed with something. Regret, maybe pride, maybe both. You own this? My father finally asked. A soft laugh escaped me. This office?
Yes.
This building?
Partially.
But more than that, I own the factories that supply half the companies you probably buy from every week. I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Not one factory. A chain. Their faces froze in disbelief. You? Ethan whispered, as if the word itself betrayed him. Me. For a long time, the only sound was the faint hum of the city below. I could see them processing, years of dismissal unraveling in a single moment. The boy who once laughed at my toolbox now stood in the empire it had built. My assistant knocked gently, peeking in. Ms. Brooks, your investors are on the line. I nodded, dismissing her with a smile. Then I turned back to the three people who once defined me by what they thought I couldn't be. I'm busy, I said, my voice calm but firm. But since you're here, tell me, what is it you want? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We need your help. And just like that, the tables had turned. For a moment, I just stood there, letting their request hang in the air like smoke. Once upon a time, those same voices had told me I was foolish, ridiculous, even embarrassing. And now they were here in my office, asking for help. I returned to my desk slowly, savoring the sound of my heels against the marble floor. Sitting down, I folded my hands and looked at each of them one by one. What kind of help? I asked. Ethan shifted first. His arrogance had always been his armor, but today it was cracked. The company I started, it's failing. We overextended. Supply costs, labor issues. I thought maybe you could, he swallowed. Maybe you could invest. My father cleared his throat. And your mother and we've been struggling too. The house repairs, medical bills, we're not asking for much, just a little support. I listened, my expression neutral, though inside I felt a storm of emotions, vindication, sadness, and something close to pity. Finally, I exhaled. Do you hear yourselves? Years ago, when I begged for your support, when all I wanted was a chance, you laughed. You dismissed me. And now you come, not because you believe in me, but because you need me. No one spoke. I leaned forward. If I help, it won't be free. There will be conditions. Ethan bristled. Conditions? Yes. My voice sharpened. Ethan, you mocked me for carrying tools, for working with my hands. If I invest in your company, it will only be on one condition. You work on the floor of one of my factories for 6 months. No office, no cushy title. You'll clock in like every other worker and learn what respect really looks like. His face flushed. He wanted to argue, but the look in my eyes stopped him. I turned to my father. You always told me no man would want me if my hands were dirty. My condition for you is simple. Stop measuring worth by appearances. Volunteer at a community workshop. Teach young people skills. Listen to their dreams. Prove that you can value people for who they are, not for how soft their hands are. He looked stunned, ashamed, but nodded faintly. Finally, I faced my mother. Her eyes were glassy, her lips trembling. And you, Mom, you stayed silent. Silence can wound just as deeply as words. My condition for you is to speak, to finally use your voice. Start small. Join a group, advocate for something you care about. Show me you can stand up for yourself and for others. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for the first time in years, she reached across the desk, her fingers barely brushing mine. I can do that, she whispered. I sat back, my heart steady. If you all agree to my terms, I'll help. But if not, this meeting is over. They exchanged glances. The weight of the moment pressed down on them until, one by one, they nodded. And just like that, the girl they once laughed at now held their futures in her hands. The weeks that followed surprised me more than I'd ever admit. Ethan showed up at the factory floor in steel-toe boots, his face pale as he realized he'd be tightening bolts and hauling crates instead of sitting in some cushioned office chair. The workers recognized him immediately as the boss's cousin, but I gave strict orders, no special treatment. To my surprise, he lasted. The first days, his hands blistered, his back ached, and he complained endlessly. But slowly, something shifted. One afternoon, I caught him eating lunch with the machinists, listening instead of bragging. His laughter was different now, softer, almost humble. My father kept his word, too. At first, he shuffled awkwardly into the community workshop, clearly out of place among teenagers tinkering with scrap metal. But soon, I'd hear stories of how he stayed late, teaching them how to measure, how to sand wood properly, how to be patient with their hands. The same man who once ridiculed me for grease-stained fingers now praised a boy for the very same thing. And my mother, quiet, careful mother, joined a local women's advocacy group. The first time she spoke publicly at a meeting, she sent me a shaky video. Her voice wavered, but it was strong enough. "For too long," she said into the microphone, "I thought silence was safety. But silence can wound. I won't stay silent anymore." Watching her, I felt something inside me finally heal. One evening, alone in my office, I pulled open the velvet pouch my grandmother once gave me. The silver wrench lay cool in my palm, the engraving catching the light. Strength is quiet. I thought of the garage floor, of Ethan's cruel laughter, of my father's disapproval, of my mother's silence. I thought of the girl I had been, small, trembling, yet stubborn enough to keep holding on. And I thought of the woman I had become, strong, unshakable, unafraid to set terms. I placed the wrench back on its shelf, right beside the old rusted tools they once mocked. Not as a reminder of pain anymore, but as proof. Proof that every insult, every dismissal, every silent night was fuel. I looked out over the city, the lights flickering like a million tiny stars. And in that quiet, I smiled. They mocked my tools. I whispered to myself, but now, I own the factory chain.